This is Dimitri Lascaris reporting for The Real News from the People's Summit in Chicago. This is the second part of our interview with Steve Horn, who is joining us from Indianapolis. Steve is a research fellow for DeSmogBlog and a freelance investigative journalist whose work has been featured in The Intercept, The Guardian, The Nation, and Truth Out. Thanks again for joining us, Steve.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, as we all know, President Trump has now announced the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. And in his speech announcing his intention to take the U.S. out of that accord, President Trump made some very stark claims about the economic costs of compliance with the agreement. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Thus, as of today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord and the draconian financial and economic burdens the agreement imposes on our country. This includes ending the implementation of the nationally determined contribution and, very importantly, the Green Climate Fund, which is costing the United States a vast fortune. Compliance with the terms of the Paris Accord and the onerous energy restrictions that is placed on the United States could cost America as much as 2.7 million lost jobs by 2025, according to the National Economic Research Associates. This includes 440,000 fewer manufacturing jobs, not what we need. Believe me, this is not what we need, including automobile jobs, and the further decimation of vital American industries on which countless communities rely. They rely for so much, and we would be giving them so little.
So, Steve, according to President Trump, the financial burden imposed on the United States by the agreement would be, quote unquote, draconian. And he specifically stated that the U.S. contribution to the Green Climate Fund would cost a vast fortune. Just in broad strokes, Steve, what is the Green Climate Fund?
The Green Climate Fund was created at the 2010 summit, United Nations Climate Summit in Cancun. It was sort of conceptualized. And moving forward, basically the aspiration of this climate fund was to mobilize from developed countries up to about $100 billion per year to finance adaptation and renewable energy for lesser developed countries. And so, the United States is one of the main, it is by actual, if you just look at the flat numbers, it is the biggest payer into the Green Climate Fund. But in terms of per capita, so far, first of all, just the flat numbers, it's committed about $3 billion to the fund. And the fund has collected about $10 billion so far at large. So it's not even close to its $100 billion per year goal, which was by 2020. But that said, the United States is not even in the top 10 if you look at the per capita numbers for the Green Climate Fund. And if you look at a little bit more closely, how much is this actually costing taxpayers? The figure is $9.41 per person, which is basically the cost of 2 beers per year or 2 frappuccinos from Starbucks per year, the equivalent of that for United States taxpayers. So it's not very much money. And again, the United States is not even in the top 10. Countries like Sweden, Norway, Germany, France, United Kingdom are all ahead of the United States in per capita contributions to the Green Climate Fund. So it's not quite costing the United States a fortune if you look at it that way, taxpayers at least.
And historically, I believe the United States is the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Is it not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. China is number 2. So if you look at it that way, if you look at what is owed based on contribution to the problem, the United States should be number 1 from that type, that perspective. And then I think another way of looking at it, if we're talking about costing a fortune, is the comparison. So right before he made this speech. Trump was in Saudi Arabia, and during that trip, the United States decided that it was going to give $110 billion in weapons to Saudi Arabia. And then recently as well, Trump announced his Pentagon budget, which basically is going to be over $600 billion. So, one more data point that's worth thinking about. President Obama has already committed, already handed over, when he was president, $1 billion of the $3 billion that the United States owes. So now it's down to $2 billion that the United States owes based on its stated commitment. So all these things, $2 billion sort of pales in comparison to the $110 billion that will be in weapons that will be given to Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, the $600 billion plus Pentagon budget that's been proposed by President Trump.
Yeah, and I don't think we've heard President Trump describe his increase in military spending as a vast fortune.
Not so. No, and of course not the Saudi Arabia weapons deal either. What he called that was a jobs program, and I think his expression was jobs, jobs, jobs when he was in Saudi Arabia when he talked about the weapons.
Right. So the second aspect of this speech announcing the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Accord that I wanted to ask you about was the claims about job losses, specifically President Trump's reliance on a consulting firm known as National Economic Research Associates. That caught my attention, as it happens, because in my prior professional life as a class actions lawyer, acting for plaintiffs who had been defrauded in the stock markets, the companies that I and my partners sued routinely hired this very firm as economic experts for the defense. And I was often amazed. I've cross-examined many NERA experts in the course of my career, and I was often amazed at the things they were willing to say to advance the interests of the defendants. Now they are being cited by the president in his claims that the Paris Climate Accord is going to cause or would cause massive job losses in the U.S. I understand you yourself have investigated NERA in the past. What did your investigation unearth?
Yeah, so I investigated NERA back in 2012, actually. This was an interesting period of time as well because there was a sea change happening with the United States in terms of fracking and exports of natural gas. And so for a while, for months back in 2012, there was a study that the Department of Energy was working on that was going to do an economic impact study of the potential for exporting gas obtained from fracking. And the Department of Energy under the Obama administration basically contracted this study out, but they wouldn't say who they contracted it out to. And then all of a sudden, Reuters did a story, and lo and behold, it was this same outfit, NERA. And that got me sort of in the investigative mode, and kind of exploring who is NERA and what's their history. And their history is they've been around for a really long time. They've been around since 1961. They were founded by a man by the name of Alfred Kahn, who was an economist at Cornell University. And he's known as the quote-unquote father of deregulation, according to an obituary that Cornell University posted after he passed away. And it was also, so he advised the founding of it. He was, basically always a consultant to NERA. But then on top of that, there's another man by the name of Erwin Stelzer, who now is a senior fellow at the right-wing corporate-funded Hudson Institute. And he helped found NERA, and he's known to those in political circles as someone who's long been the quote-unquote right-hand man of Rupert Murdoch, according to a 2004 story that appeared in The Guardian. So these are politically connected conservative players in the United States who have been around for decades. NERA has been around for decades, and they've long put out these types of studies. This one was funded by the Chamber of Commerce and by the American Council on Capital Formation. And the Council on Capital Formation is funded, or has been funded by ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, Marathon Oil, etc. And then NERA is the common theme of NERA studies. I just mentioned that one was funded by corporate America. That's the common theme, is that corporate America or their clients pay them to put out these studies. They have the veneer of legitimacy because they're kind of boring sounding name, but at the end of the day, these studies actually are peddled by prominent people both in the Democratic Party and then especially in the Republican Party, and cited as arguments for deregulation or arguments in favor of the status quo. And so I think that if you look at this Paris study that they put out in March 2017, it's just the next iteration of what they've been doing for decades.
This has been Dimitri Lascaris speaking to Steve Horn of DeSmogBlog. Thank you very much for joining us, Steve.
Thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
And Dimitri Lascaris for the Real News from the People Summit in Chicago.